If we could change the world, if you could change the world, would you birth more love in it? Is love alive? Has anyone heard that Sarah Bareilles song that's really popular this season? It's a beautiful song, and it keeps asking that question, is love alive? This Sunday marks Love Sunday of Advent, which in Unity we go on a process of an internal advent, an internal awakening that begins with faith and hope, that moves through the birth of peace, that moves through the emanation of love, and culminates in joy, which is the birth of the Christ of the awakened, the mindful consciousness, the full awareness of unity consciousness, unity with our source, unity with what we call God, unity with life, because you know we cannot have unity with God if we do not have unity with humanity. Amen? If we think that we can have love or a spiritual practice that includes God and actually emanates God and radiates the teachings of the master teacher, it cannot leave out one creature or one soul on the planet, can it? In fact, it would be faulty to think that it's possible to even practice a spiritual consciousness of God consciousness and the practice and the walk of the saints and the sages and the master teachers throughout time without fully falling on our knees in love with the beauty of all humanity in all of its form, in all of its phases, with all of its beauties, with all of its highs and all of its lows. Amen? Now, we may try and we may think that we can. But the truth is, the moment we set someone outside of ourselves, the moment we set something outside of ourselves, the moment we don't care about something outside of us as if it was not ultimately beloved to the consciousness of full creativity, which is God consciousness, we are standing in separation. We are standing out of alignment with God. We are trying to cut off an arm and celebrate the body. We are trying to shut down an organ, but benefit from its function. So love and the birth of love is a spiritual practice. And in Unity, we come together, in consciousness, we come together each week, not to hear what other people think about things, but to dive into our own spiritual practice, to come together in consciousness, recognizing that we are like a beautiful stew, a beautiful soup, that the consciousness that each of us comes to a moment with is put together in a cosmic soup to lift and to raise and to radiate a vibration combined with all of our intentions for awakening and mindfulness from which we get to all share and break bread. And that is our spiritual practice, because our spiritual practice in Unity is about applying mindfulness, about waking to each moment and applying practical principles to everyday life, to looking at how we impact ourselves and how we impact our world and how our perspectives and our perceptions can ignite love and can demonstrate what we call God, which is truly the grand overall design of life. It is that overall design immersed in love, expressed in light. Our focus is also on doing an internal inquiry, to really asking ourselves hard questions in life and seeing how what we focus on makes a difference in our world. If we ask that question today, is love alive? It's certainly easy to look at the ways that it's not alive, right? It's certainly easy to look at where hatred has a hold, to where bigotry is still strong and running with flame and fire, to look at how suffering, sadness, and depression is still very much present in our world. But our spiritual practice is to take a deeper look and to see with spiritual vision. Our spiritual practice is to take a story from 2,000 years ago and recognize that it was given to us by mystics and sages throughout time, that there are layers and layers and layers to this story, and that we are to hear this birth story, we are to hear these passed down pieces of wisdom in ways that meet us right where we are, in ways that are relevant to right now and today. I was recently invited to lunch with some good friends of UVC here, and we were talking about spirituality and the practice and what's going on now. And one of the things that was said at this lunch is we are just scratching the surface of what spirituality can do. This will be known as primitive times, a time when human beings still killed one another for war or for power, that they still took human life. This will be known as a time where love was often misguided to be attached to money rather than consciousness and compassion, rather than to humanity. This will be known as a time when there was greed over giving, where people put poison into their bodies and poison into the earth, where care for children and elderly, care for people was waning or lacking. At some point in the future of humanity, this to some degree will be known as the Dark Ages. A time where any human being would kill another human being and not know their divine worth, not know the divine birthright. But this will also be the time known as the time when the groundwork was laid in people's hearts, when the scales were tipped, when love was so present in the heart of humanity that people woke up beyond their inherited limited beliefs, beyond their programming that may have taught them to hate, beyond closed ideas about how we are to be here and live here on the planet together. You know, we look back in history and we think about times, you know, the Christian Crusades, we think about the witch trials, we think about all of these things that have happened that were barbaric. But can we see to the future and can we bring it to the now? A time when we will look back at right now and go, oh, how would one think you could pollute the Mother Earth and still say happy, still breathe clean air? How could one think that taking a life was in any way a reasonable repercussion for anything? How could one think these things? I always marvel in pain, of course, when I see these shootings that happen and when I hear about them, and I honestly just think it's archaic and I don't understand. Why are guns even carried around in that fashion for people? Why are guns carried around in that way at all anyway? Like, think about a tranquilizer gun for an elephant. Like, seriously here for a second. Think about a tranquilizer gun, right? How on earth do we value, we use tranquilizer guns to, help animals get transferred. How on earth are all police weapons not just tranquilizer guns? That would just go, hey, okay, you're doing something, you can't be doing it, boop, go to sleep. And then let's get you into a rehabilitation program. Let's figure out what is missing. Let's figure out what kind of an environment you need to be in so that you are not destructive or harmful to humanity. It's archaic. And there are so many other things that follow that line of thinking, right? But does that mean love is not alive? No, love has been born. It was born in the mind of God. It was born when you were born, and it could never be diminished, no matter what these outside circumstances show, no matter what the appearance of. This is our practice in unity, is to know this truth, that we are not just separate sense beings that are just born into some carnal reality for a series of 0 to 100 years. We are spiritual beings evolving in consciousness together, awakening and enlightening humanity to its divinity together in every moment. And so it is ours to look at everything over and over again, to refine it, to upgrade it within ourselves and within our world. There was a story that was shared with me recently about a woman named Karen. She used to be a nurse, And she lived in our area. She lived in the Grandview area, and she had a tent because she was homeless. She had a tent that she lived in the woods behind a church in this area of Grandview. Now, the business owners that work there and people that go to their jobs there and the people of the church community knew her. She was known for her spirit and her energy and her, interacting and greeting. And then it was known that she was also an alcoholic and that she could get pretty feisty sometimes. But she was part of life in that area, and people would greet her and say hi to her. She was also known as being a giver. She refused to take money when she donated blood. She refused to take whatever it was that was being offered back to her because she had a spirit about her, a spirit of giving. And there were people that would come check on her tent to make sure she was okay. And there is known to be a husband and wife that live in that area that keep their doors open for all of the homeless people, so that at any time and any night that it got too cold, they knew they could come, sleep on a couch, sleep in a chair, sleep on the floor. This is in Grandview, Missouri, just a few miles from here. So that they could get a warm meal, so that they knew that they could just, without even knocking, just enter in and be cared for, have their basic needs met. Well, there were a series of murders in the Kansas City area. There was someone that went around and was taking lives, and it's been in the last few years. And just recently, they have connected her death to this person. She was murdered in her tent, and she was found by the community. Now, when they tried to reach out and find family for a memorial and to claim her body, there was no one they could find. And the community shared stories about the little that they did know about her, and they knew that her mother and her father had passed, and they exhausted all options. The police did not have an option for how to get in touch with anyone or if anyone else existed. What could have happened next is nothing. What could have happened next is that people said, well, that's good. There's not someone homeless on the street anymore that I have to walk by every day. What could have happened next is that they said, well, we just need to do something with the body and move on. What could have happened next was nothing. But what did happen was love. The people of that church community came together. The area business owners came together. And the people who passed by her every day, on their way to work, on their way in every morning and every evening, that spoke with her. And the homeless people in the area that checked in on her and that knew her as part of the homeless community all got together and they had a memorial service for her. They talked about her. They shared the gift that she was in their lives. They shared the impact she had. They shared love, and they had communion around celebrating what is and was and continues to be her life. A funeral home donated a burial site, and Faith Ministries Community Church hosted and celebrated her life. One of the local business owners, Michael Lane, said, there's nothing anyone can do about her senseless demise, but as a community, we can make sure she is laid to rest with respect and dignity that every human being deserves. He went on to say, we cannot allow an act of senseless evil to be the legacy. We cannot allow that to be the legacy, that to be the story that is told. He says, through her tragedy, we as a community can show that good is more powerful than evil. So though she lost her life on July 19th of this year, in November of this year, she was seen and honored and celebrated. Love is alive. Love is alive. If we take the birth story from so many years ago and we bring it to now and look at this story in its fullness and in its entirety. And if some of you are new to looking at the Bible metaphysically, which means beyond the physical, beyond the literal, but going into the deep mystical meanings, looking at the numerology, looking at the soul of it, looking at like, this is a dream that came to you out of nowhere. It came to you in the middle of the night. It was your dream, and you woke with this dream to sit with it and say, what does that dream have with me? For those of you that are used to literal translations, this may be a stretch, but if you try it on, see what might be here for you. The birth story is our story. Everything in it are the characters in our consciousness, in our psyche, in our world. And when we look at it that way, we no longer care that there may be facts that are off. We no longer care even that are things like women can be omitted. We don't care, but we look at it as, what is that meaning there? What does that say about the practical times? What does it say historically? What does it say metaphysically? What does it say mystically? How am I to be in that story? We look at the birth story and we no longer care that it's not consistent throughout the Gospels. And if that's news to you, I'm sorry to break that news. But it's true. There are big variations that if you're looking for consistency and you're looking for a scientific mind, you can recognize very easily and readily that these folks that passed on these stories, these folks that emanated and radiated and stirred them and brought them to us, brought them here to not just bless us, but to frustrate us and to leave us something where we are forced to leave out the logical mind and to enter the mystical journey. Because otherwise we'll argue ourselves to death. Who was there? Was it the wise men or was it the kings? Where did they go? What happened? How did this come? How did that come? How did that evolve? Oh, and then watch a National Geographic and you'll blow it out of the water even more. Does that mean these stories don't have value? Does that mean that this mystical tradition that was passed on to us is less powerful? Or does it mean that because it breaks through the conditioning of our human belief system, our meaning-making, our order machine, because it breaks through that, it has the potential to be more expansive than it would if it was laid out for us? In the birth story, Mary had to go beyond what the times were saying. She was known as a virgin, which can also translate to being a young woman. And there she was with child. At a time where, if you were in her situation, and you could imagine what that equates to today. If you're in any sort of alternative situation that the world doesn't christen for you, you have the opportunity to focus on what would be normal and what would be expected for the life of your child. What you think it's really going to inherit from the world. Or you have the opportunity to go directly to the source of your being, to know original blessing, and to hold the space of absolute majesty, to hold the space of complete honor, to hold the space of knowing that even in this moment, there is high and holy perfection. Even in this moment, I birth the Son of God. How many situations and circumstances are people born into these days where people crucify and categorize them, where people try to say to one another, that one won't make it, that one's not perfect, that situation, that circumstance is not according to my mind's idea of how this is supposed to go, therefore it cannot succeed. Mary's heart was opened. her being was opened. And then you have Joseph. Joseph had the opportunity for abandonment, the opportunity for separation, the opportunity to make wrong, the opportunity to say, not mine. But what was born in him, going directly to source, was absolute love, was a power that was stronger than that, a power that can open your heart beyond tradition, beyond your inheritance, that can open your mind beyond the world's idea, and that can be so clear and powerful that you can call something which others may call a situation a blessing. And then what happened with the wise men, the shepherds, the kings? They went beyond their tradition of where they are told light will come from. They went beyond their education and their programming of where they are to go and what they are to follow. They went beyond all of it, and they came to the birth of light. They arrived at the birth of light by fearlessly following their intuition, following it over everything else, following it to a manger, following it to a child, following it to the birth of an unfortunate circumstance. And the beauty of this cosmic soup in this mystical story is that it is given to us to remind us that everything is holy. It is given to us to remind us that everyone is holy, that the divine blueprint within each of us is the one thing that we are to hold to, that we are to focus on, that we are to celebrate, that we are to come to the birth of. And it is ours to be on this planet, not to separate ourselves from humanity and each other, whether or not we understand each other, but to come together in light, to come together in love. So often, the teachings of Jesus have been focused on his suffering. And maybe in keeping that focus so much on the suffering, it has caused like-mindedness. Because a lot of the teachings of the Christian church and a lot of the teachings of Jesus have been used to separate people, have been used to judge when in fact they are mystically, metaphysically, and logically here to remind us to be in absolute love and compassion and to birth that, to have our values based on that. Anyone who actively causes suffering by pressing out their judgments, by excluding, by saying you are not fitting into my framework of what a human being is supposed to be, look like, how they're supposed to come onto this planet, how they're supposed to arrive, how we're supposed to be around them. Anyone that is causing or creating suffering around that is not following the teachings of Jesus, the master teacher, is not following the teachings of the Christ, is not following the teachings of the true church, which the true church in Christian history is the people. It is that the people are the body of Christ, that God has no hands on earth but yours. No feet but yours, no heart but yours, no eyes but yours. It's from the teachings of Teresa of Avila. That in fact it is ours to emanate God consciousness in all circumstances. And any time that we find our human mind judging and going, that's not how, this is not what, all we need to do is say, peace, be still, and lift it up for transformation. It's okay to have it. What's not okay is to act from it. It's okay that it comes up. What's not okay is not to look at it. It's part of the human condition. But our spiritual condition has a power that overrides every aspect of the carnal mind. And that is unfailing, it is always present, and it is more powerful than anything we could ever inherit or be programmed with. There was a beautiful man that nearly made me cry on the news this week. He was from Alabama, or is from Alabama, and he was talking about honoring each other, honoring our life choices, and getting love, like really getting love at a deep level. He said that his daughter, who was a same-sex lover, committed suicide. And big burly man on the news, as he shared this story, it was like the love just radiated from his being. And you could almost see, as he was sharing it, you could almost see all the things that he grew up with, all the programming, right? And then you could almost see how he showed up, and he said, he used the word pervert. He said that he used to call her a pervert. She's not physically on this planet for him to call her anything anymore. But I think if she was here, he would call her Christ now. Because he got it. He became awakened. And unfortunately, it was through painful suffering. It was through such intense suffering of realizing that because of an inherited idea of lack, because of a miscalculation of God, a misteaching of the master teacher, he caused suffering and supported a consciousness of suffering in the life of his most beloved. And his Mary self and his Joseph self and the kings and the wise men and the shepherds, he got it that they were all meant to come and to bow and to sit in reverence for the most holy birth and life of his beloved daughter. I could tell in his eyes he got that. And you can see the pain when we wake up to recognizing the beauty of love and the error and harm and suffering that the human condition can cause. But the beauty, the true beauty, is that love is alive. The true beauty is that he's using his daughter's life and his own awakening to share this message so that other people don't have to go through the same suffering. No? And that's what a bodhisattva is. That's what Jesus the Master Teacher is. And it's known through all religion and traditions throughout time. It's the one and the consciousness that comes in to remind us of who and whose we are, to remind us of love, to remind us love is alive, and to stand in love, graciousness, forgiveness, peace, and compassion, so that we may awaken to the truth of our being and we may stop tearing apart and judging, but we may value our lives and other lives based on the compassion and the heart with which we live. Martin Luther King said, "We need leaders not in love with money, but in love with justice, not in love with publicity, but in love with humanity." We need leaders in love with humanity. Feel that, in love with humanity. Am I willing to take a step in my spiritual practice where I open up to even greater degrees of falling in love with humanity? It's got to come from a Zen place, right? Because the brain's not going to do it. Only the heart can do it. Only the heart has the power to do that. We all change the world. We know that famous quote by Margaret Mead where she says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Well, you can change the world. I can change the world. That man changed the world. Karen changed the world. Every moment we're awake, we change the world. Make no mistake, whether or not we change the world is not optional. How we change it is up to us. Namaste.